Hello and welcome to this podcast. My name is Sharon Peacock and I'm Professor of Public Health and Microbiology at the University of Cambridge and the Executive Director of the COVID-19 Genomics UK Consortium, which was developed at pace to generate SARS-CoV-2 genomes for the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm also a non-executive director on the board of the Cambridge University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. So welcome to the Inspiring Leadership Series. And I'm going to hand you over now to Jonathan Bowman-Perks.
Thank you very much indeed, Sharon. And firstly, congratulations on your CBE. But also it was Martin Doherty, who we both know well, and I've been fortunate enough to be Martin's coach, and now I'm very lucky to be yours, in that they really speak very highly of you and the work that you've done. And this series is all about people who recommend other people that they find inspiring. Now, Martin's someone I find very inspiring, and he said that for him, you capture the 3 points that we look for on this series, which is humility, humanity, and a nice bit of humor. And I found as we've worked together, you have all three. So look, great having you on the series. Tell us, I mean, you've had a hell of a couple of years with COVID. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing and this team you encouraged to come together to help the country and the government.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I'd start by saying that we've all had a hell of a 2 years actually, and every one of us have our own story to tell about that. So we've all been through the mill. My story started really in the beginning of the pandemic, March 2020. So going back a bit longer than that, I've spent 10 years thinking about and working on how we can take the kind of technology of sequencing and kind of apply it to pathogens that cause us problems, cause disease and cause outbreaks. And I've been thinking about how to apply sequencing to pathogens to make a difference for human health and to improve human health. So when the pandemic came along, I felt very strongly that we needed to apply sequencing to the virus that caused COVID-19. And the reason that was important is because viruses, like other pathogens and other organisms, they evolve over time. And they do that through a process of natural selection, i.e. they're likely to get fitter and fitter over time. And what that means is they could be more transmissible or they could dodge our immune system. So back in March 2020, when there were fewer than around 80 diagnosed cases in the UK, I set about getting a group together to develop the consortium, which I now run, specifically to get the technology up and ready so that we were sequencing the virus as much as we could and be prepared to capture those viral changes, those mutations, and be ready to use sequencing to provide actionable information to public health agencies.
Absolutely fascinating what has been achieved, and the amount of hard work by so many different people, quietly out of sight, but not out of impact, is very encouraging and very inspiring. So that's been a really busy time, but take us back to early childhood and the kind of events that have shaped your life to come and be the leader you are today, working with some fascinating people, making a real impact and helping so many people in this country and beyond.
Yeah. Before I do that, just a point that there are 600 people in the consortium that I manage, and they're nearly all volunteers. And unsung hero is a really important phrase because they've worked away and they have made that happen. But where did I start? Well, I have to say that I didn't do too well at school. I think that's probably an understatement, actually. I didn't do too well at school, and I failed the 11 plus. So that was a real kind of key moment in the life of people who went to school, and I did. And if you failed your 11 plus, you went to the secondary modern school, and most children did go to the secondary modern school rather than grammar schools. And in our school, the focus was really on very practical training. So I did home economics, sewing, and other sort of practical skills. We could learn shorthand typing. And there was a basic education in English and mathematics, and you could take GCSEs, they were called O levels back then, but actually I was prevented from taking O levels in maths, physics and chemistry. And so I left school at 16 and with no career aspirations actually. And I went and worked in a corner shop where I had been working part-time before I left school. So it felt like the natural progression to go and work in this shop full-time. And that's exactly what I did when I left school at 16.
Mm. And it's so interesting, that kind of experience at 16. What did it teach you about humans, people? You know, I mean, I know we talk about pathogens and you spend your time examining them, but I found you to be very good in the way you relate and connect with people. You must have learned a lot, even just in the corner shop.
I loved it. Actually, I really loved it. I worked, there was a small deli counter there where I would serve cheese and meats and so on. And I really loved that. I loved the precision of being able to put biscuits on the shelf so that they look really nice and really presentable. By the end of the day, you know, the biscuit shelf was looking a bit scruffy, so I'd have to go and tidy it up. That was a great joy. And actually being with people and serving them, I liked serving people, and that was, I really enjoyed my time in the shop actually. Yeah. It brought me into contact with a lot of the local community, and that was just fun.
And so take us on from the corner shop. What next?
Yes, well, there was a notice board in the corner shop which advertised jobs. And about 2 doors down, there was a dental surgery, and they'd put a notice up to say they were looking for a dental nurse. It was a single-handed practice, so there's one dentist, and this position was actually the only dental nurse, and combined with receptionist, actually. So I applied for that and I got it. So I moved 2 doors up and I worked as a dental nurse, and that was a good time, really. It was very hard work. I'd work long hours and on Saturdays. But I was able to go to evening class, take a train and take an evening class 1 day a week where I trained to be, you know, get the theory side of dental nursing. So I became a qualified dental nurse over a period of around 2.5 years. And that was fun because you really helped to run the business. You were responsible for opening up the dentist and keeping everything clean and making sure that your patients were well looked after. So that, again, I grew up a lot during that period of time because I was really running the business for my dentist.
Yeah, and you would have been, what, about 18 or 19 by the time you finished there? Yeah,
I was. I started when I was still 16. And so by the time I left, I was 19. And I got a huge amount of sort of very practical experience. It was a busy place. And I learned a lot there.
Yeah, and you couldn't really be a wallflower there because you were the receptionist. You also had to work with him, and he probably had quite high standards. Fascinating. Yes. Okay. So how did you get from dental nurse to the next stage of your career?
Well, I realized that I really liked to serve others, and but I wanted to go beyond. I mean, teeth are really important in our lives. They help us eat, and they're important in our appearance and so on. But I wanted to do something more, so I applied to become a general adult nurse. It was quite difficult to get in because I didn't have any of the appropriate GCSE qualifications, and at the dentist that wasn't as important then, but for nursing it was. And so it was quite difficult to get in to become a trainee nurse, to become a state registered nurse, but I did get in, and I went off to train as a nurse, which I completed and enjoyed a great deal.
Yeah, and it's interesting, both the dental side and the nursing side. It may only just be an urban myth, but I seem to remember that dentists have some of the highest suicide rates in any of the professions. And I just wondered, in your own limited experience, why do you think that is?
Golly, I don't know. I think the pressure of work is actually very high for people in the healthcare industry generally. I'm sure somebody else would be far more knowledgeable about the rate of suicide and why that would be, but people generally in the healthcare professions, they work very hard, they're very driven, they're very committed, but the pace of work is pretty relentless, as we know in the NHS as well.
Yeah.
And so that brings a pressure to bear on people.
Yeah, and never more so than now. And I think it was you saying in the BBC Sounds podcast, which I do recommend people listen to as well. It was an excellent podcast, that we've now got this winter coming up here as we speak now, with that influenza and the COVID combination, which is going to make it very hard for the health professionals working in the NHS and privately to deal with that. From the nursing side, how long did you do in nursing before you then, I think you then went on to wanted to become a doctor, didn't you? How long were you a nurse before you made the next step?
Yeah, your listeners must be wondering how long this narrative is going to go on. It could go on quite a long time, but the next stage really, I was on a male medical ward actually. It was in Brighton at the Royal Sussex County Hospital, and I was 6 months into my training, and I was watching junior doctors, take a history from patients, examine them, do the test, get a diagnosis, and I thought, wow, that is what I want to do in my career. I really want to be a doctor. I didn't tell anyone because I thought that actually people might find that quite amusing, that somebody with very few qualifications wanted to be a doctor. And I think it's right that actually we have doctors from every walk of life and background, because that's what our patients represent. But then it was quite tough to say, well, I want to be a doctor next. And so 6 months in, I knew I had to go to night school to get O-level GCSEs in physics, maths and chemistry, which I did. And then I knew I had to get A-levels. And so I completed my training as a nurse, and I worked on a male medical ward for a period of time. And I did nights actually, because if you do nights, when patients are sleeping, you can get your textbooks out and read them. And then I enrolled for part-time A-levels in a technical college. And at the same time, I specialised in end-of-life care. And so for 2 years, I worked in 2 hospices, nights and weekends, and whenever I had time, as well as balancing my A-levels in chemistry, biology and physics.
And now that's a profession that I have great admiration for, nurses such as the Macmillan nurses doing end-of-life care. And having had my brother who died just 2 months ago, and we had to do end-of-life care at home for him, palliative care. And he was way too young, in my view, at 63 to die. But great respect for that. What was perhaps 1 or 2 things that you learned when you're with people who know they're going to die? I mean, the lessons from those who are dying are quite profound for us today. And I think you got very much grounded in the attitude you have, as we'll talk about when you talk about your poems as well. But what did you learn doing palliative end-of-life care?
Well, I think that to be with somebody in their last few days, weeks or months is something that is a great privilege, actually. It can also be quite hard, especially if you do that repeatedly. And so you get to know that patient, you get to know their backstory, and you get to know their family. And that, so over the years, you accumulate the memories of people who have died. You don't ever forget them. You carry them with you, but you have to let go the fact that they've died, because otherwise it would be impossible to get through life really with that kind of sadness. And so you have to let it go. But they have taught me a great deal. And, the key thing is really to grab life by the ears and enjoy every single moment, really enjoy every drop of it. For example, make sure that you spend time with your family and friends. Make time for yourself to go to your concerts or read that book that you've always wanted to read, and live your life to the full, because it's not going to last forever. And it's so important to take time out. Work is not life. Work is important, but go out there and live life, and say the things that you want to say to people as well. Don't hold back on that. So I learned a lot from caring for people towards the end of their life. And those are just some of the things that I kind of kept with me, really.
Yeah, no, I must admit that really touched me and made me really think. Thank you. So how did we get to where you are now? What were the next couple of steps?
Well, after my light bulb moment as a nurse, thinking I'm going to be a doctor, and I confided in my partner, who's still my husband. We've been together for a long time, but I worked hard. I applied to medical school 2 years running, and I was rejected. And I got to the point where I thought, I really want to do this. And by this time I was what's called a mature student. I didn't think I was that old. I was 23, but I picked up the phone and I rang my university of choice, which is the University of Southampton. And I said, look, can you just please consider my application? I didn't really know what else to do, to tell you the truth. And so they said, well, okay, come and see us and write an essay, a little essay, 400 words on why you want to come and do medicine. And I was interviewed by the admissions tutor at the time. And I remember it really clearly. And something must have sort of struck him that it was worth taking a risk on me, actually, because I did have something of an unusual background for compared with other medical students. And I was in medical school within a month. I think somebody must have dropped out, perhaps. And within a month of that interview, I was in medical school, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my luck. This was amazing, and really, the social mobility from education, from being able to take yourself from one place to the next through education, is immensely powerful. And really, since medical school, I've just had I've always had a brilliant time in my life, but I never looked back after that moment, really. And medical school was brilliant.
Fantastic. And then from medical school, how about the microbiology and all the pathogens and things like that?
Yeah, well, I trained as a doctor. I then decided I was going to be a physician. I was particularly interested in cardiology, actually. I thought I was going to be a cardiologist. And I did my higher professional training, so I became a member of the Royal College of Physicians. And then I went to work in Oxford, where infectious diseases and microbiology was very strong. And having spent my time there, I just really fell in love with that discipline. And so I trained to be a clinical microbiologist, which is the discipline where you're kind of a specialist on how to diagnose infectious diseases, how to treat it, and infection prevention and control, stopping people getting infections in hospital and so on. That would be my area of expertise, prescribing antibiotics and so on. So that, and so I became a consultant microbiologist in Oxford for a period of time.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, as you know, I had my own recent massive infection, and antibiotics were given to me. But of course, I'm a great one for building up the gut microbiome. How do we get it? How do we get it back when we've been through a process of ripping out most of our gut flora and fauna by it's almost like I use the analogy. It's like trying to kill a terrorist in London, and you nuke the whole of London, but you get that one terrorist, but you take out the rest of the town. What would you recommend as sort of getting your immune system back up and getting yourself healthy after you've had something like this with pathogens?
I think it's kind of like common sense advice, really. So yes, antibiotics really do perturb the gut flora, but antibiotics are absolutely life-saving, and there are times when we absolutely need them to save our lives and to reduce disease burden, so that we stay well. And the reason why our life expectancy is so much higher now is in large part due to antibiotics and the ability to treat infectious diseases. But yes, it does perturb the gut microbiome. And I think it's just sensible, balanced diet, sensible eating, and rest, and nothing to extremes, and your gut microbiome will return. You have to be patient and look after yourself. Eat a healthy, balanced diet. And moderation with good food, and some sense, looking after yourself basically. Will bring it back. The difficulty is when you're on antibiotics for a very long time, which can actually perturb it for extended periods of time. Some people do need to take antibiotics for a long time, but if you have a short course, you do it because it's life-saving, or it can really treat your condition, which is the right thing to do. But then you can recover your gut microbiome by a sensible eating and looking after yourself.
Very wise.
It will get back. It will get back, Jonathan.
It will get back. It will get back. So, Sharon, let's go round the inspiring leadership compass, the 8 points and some tips from you, which those listening could make use of. Let's begin at the very top with the true north, the MQ, the moral quotient, your values, your beliefs, your upbringing. If you were to share your sort of top 3 foundational values that you've lived by, what would they be?
Compassion would be at the top. I don't think you'll be that surprised about that, but that is inherent in how the work that I do, but how I approach life. The second would be endurance. Sometimes you have to keep at things and not let life setbacks put you off too much. So I think endurance is my second, and my third is integrity. I think to have a deep integrity, I think that, in the world that we live in at the moment, integrity has never been more important than it is now. Well, perhaps it's always, actually, that's probably not true. Integrity is always important, but we have to remind ourselves of the importance of integrity and honesty. Yeah. And hold others to account for the same. Yeah.
Never more important than currently, whether we're talking about the environment or the pandemic or digital transformation. And if I could jump back to 2 questions I had for you, which I skipped over, but I really want to ask them of you. The first one is proudest moments and darkest moments in the whole of your life. What would you pick out as a proudest moment and what you learned from it, and a darkest moment in professional or personal life, and what you also learned from that?
Yeah, I'm going to focus on work, because the proudest moments have to be in my overall life absolutely has to be family. My proudest moment at work is the development of the consortium I run at the moment. And what I learned from that is that people will come together in times of crisis and behave in a way that's quite utterly remarkable. They'll put aside they'll work so hard, they'll put aside their own needs and wishes and get something done collectively. So the UK has now sequenced more than 1 million viral genomes for the pandemic response. And that makes a real difference, because it will help us understand whether the virus is becoming more immune to vaccines, etc. It's a critical capability. So that I'm really proud about that, but I'm proud because of the people that made it happen. It was them. My darkest moment was really, I lived and worked in Thailand for 7 years. I worked out there running a research group on bacterial diseases of actually the rural poor in South and East Asia. And I was there when the tsunami happened in 2004. There was an earthquake and tsunami in the Indian Ocean. And so Boxing Day 2004, we had decided as a family not to go to the beach. And that's quite unusual, actually. We'd normally go to the beach at Christmas. And I started to get messages coming in from people saying, "Are you okay? Where are you?" And that was a really profound moment, because people in our apartment block, they didn't come home. Friends and family, teachers, my children's friends, and that was a really, really difficult time, actually. And so that was tough. But then we got word that people were developing a particular infectious disease, which is quite rare in the area that it was affecting Thailand in. It was called melioidosis. It's something that's quite a kind of a rare disease in the UK, but it's very important in parts of the world. And this bacterium, it lives in the soil. Naturally, it lives in the soil and in certain places of the world. And you get disease by either inhaling the bacterium or getting in through a cut. And we started to hear that people had this disease called melioidosis in the tsunami affected areas. And so myself and a team of Thai colleagues went to the affected area to see if we could help. So we did ward rounds. We helped advise about how to culture the bacterium, because it's actually really difficult to spot if you don't know what you're looking for. It looks like a kind of a contaminant. It looks like kind of something that you would just pass over. You also need 3 months of antibiotics at least to cure this. It's like something that just it's very difficult to eradicate from the body. And the reason that we wanted to do that is because we wanted to help people who had developed myelioidosis. But this bacterium is also being, it's like a kind of, it's almost like a time bomb. So if you actually acquire the organism, it can last in your body completely quietly for up to 30, 50 years. So the longest time between exposure and disease is up to 50 years. And in fact, it affected the US veterans who were in the conflict in Vietnam. And so there were people who got disease many years later. So people have to know whether this is a real problem. So we went and studied it. We collected soil from the environment to see if the bacterium could be cultured, and it could. We saw cases and they did have myelioidosis. We checked people's blood for antibody levels to see if they'd been exposed to this during the tsunami, because of course people were very injured and they had cuts and they inhaled water, etc. And this organism doesn't grow in the sea, but it all got mixed up with kind of the soil on the land. That taught me so much. It taught me about the fragility of life. So we went to an area of Thailand called Khao Lak, where there were about 3,500 people living, a fishing village actually, and the whole town was completely eradicated. There were big fishing boats actually beached up on the land, and I'd never seen anything quite like that before. It was extremely profound. So I think that, looking back there, what I learned about that is several things. First of all, you have to do something if you think you've got something to offer, even if it's quite small. There was a small number of people with myelioidosis. We went down there and we did our best. We weren't part of the helicopter crews or the deep divers or whatever, but we did our best. So I think that, getting up and doing something if you think there's something you can offer. I think that, and not being frightened to stare something like that in the face and get on with it. But also it teaches you yet again about the fragility of life. I seem to have those lessons again and again, actually. I'm not quite sure why, but I think realizing that something can happen. People were taken by surprise when they were at, having a Christmas holiday, and nothing's ever the same. So you have to remember that in your life.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but notice and pick up, and I felt it viscerally from you, somatically from you, as you were talking about that. It must have really hit you and all those you knew and loved so hard.
Yeah.
And you will never, it was 2004, but you'll never get over that. You'll never forget that.
No.
Just as friends of mine who served in combat and lost friends never get over it, whether it's PTSD or whether it's just the memory of the people they lost, whether it's been the Falklands War or Bosnia or wherever else they might be, Iraq or Afghanistan, because it was like a war zone.
It was absolutely. Whole landscapes were completely obliterated, and there were some very, very sad scenes there. But you're right, it was difficult. But it comes back to this idea that, and you're right, I do still feel quite emotional about it. But you remember. It's important to remember, but you have to let go, if you can, the emotion of it. We just had Remembrance Sunday and Remembrance, and these are points. I can't tell other people how they should live their lives, but for me, if I remember that very vividly, but on a day-to-day basis, I have to, you have to let go. I certainly have to let go of that emotion. But it was a very, very valuable lesson in life, I have to say.
No, I think it was. And it's interesting you mentioned Remembrance Service, because obviously for me, my father served and was killed when he was 33. My uncle was killed serving when he was 29. My grandfather was serving in the War Office and he was killed in a plane crash aged 50. And so it's times you remember them, and you don't have to wait for once a year. You can often have their memories just at different times of your life. But I think those kind of experiences are just shocking, very public and very, global. Thailand, have you ever been back since? And if you were to recommend to someone like myself, Lee and I wanted to go to Thailand, where would you recommend, if you like coasts and beauty, where would you recommend we go now after it's all recovered?
Well, I do go back regularly, and I have long life friends. Having worked there for 7 years, I have very strong bonds with Thailand. And I took my children. When we left, they were six months and 2 6-year-olds. We were all standing in the lobby of our house waiting for the taxi to come along, and my husband and I looked at each other, sort of, what are we doing? But we all had the time of our lives, and they still look back to Thailand very fondly. And I continue to go back. So I worked there on and off for many years, and I can't wait to go back now that the travel restrictions are over. I think in terms of where to go, I won't get started because there are so many beautiful places in Thailand, so many beautiful beaches, and also the countryside too. And so Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, into the hills. But there are some incredible places all across Thailand. And so, Jonathan, we're going to have another session offline when I take you through an itinerary, because it's a really wonderful place with wonderful people, actually.
Yeah.
So a good place to go back, and they need the tourism.
They do. No, it's interesting. We went to a wedding just in February 2020, a wedding in Sri Lanka. And of course, they got hit terribly on the West Coast. It sort of swung around and whacked against the West Coast, the wave of the country, and they lost so many people too, and the devastation. But they were very grateful for the tourism. But then, of course, COVID-19 just wiped the tourism out. So they're desperate to get themselves back up, and we can help them. So much we could talk about there. But I also, one of my other questions was, all the experiences you've had now, and all that you've learned, if you were to go back to the 16-year-old working in the corner shop, doing the deli counter, and then doing the dental nurse bit, what bit of advice would you give to the young Sharon Peacock about this is important, but don't worry about that, which might be relevant to people who are at the same age now, but what would be your bit of advice?
I would have told myself, I think, that it's going to be okay in the end, and everything's going to work out. And that actually it would have been helpful if somebody had told me that I was better than I thought, because I didn't really, feel I had any gifts or talents when I was younger. And to hear somebody say, do you know what, you are a lot better than you think. So get on and get out there and follow your dreams and do everything you can to make that happen. And I think the other piece of advice is really, along the way, you only need to compare yourself with yourself. And so you can continue to, improve your life and contribute more in life by comparing what you did yesterday or last year. And I think for modern day life, don't compare yourself with other people, because that's tough and it's rather futile. So I think that's what I'd say to myself. It's going to be okay. Get out there and follow your dreams, and just compare yourself to yourself along that journey.
That's so profound. I think, looking back, I think I was way too intense, trying too hard, sort of competing with other people, comparing myself to other people. One of the psychologists I work with when we do psychometrics, Lee and I, was laughing at my profile and Lee's profile, and said that Lee is comparative, but Jonathan, you're competitive and comparative. You got the double problem. And I said that explains a lot of my psychology and my problem. Great, thank you for that, Sharon. Great wisdom. Let's go back around the campus onto number 2, which was PQ, meaning and purpose quotient. Why do you do what you do? What's your dharma? You will, of course, come across that in your travels. Your vocation, your calling. What gives your life meaning and purpose?
Well, you might have guessed by now that my drive is to serve others. That's what brings me great joy. But there's a special combination when you're actually able to learn and improve yourself at the same time as using that knowledge to help others. And that two-way directionality is important, because it constantly reinforces the connectivity between improving yourself and making something of yourself, but then improving the world and those around you. So I think if I have a dharma, it's helping others by improving myself and then going out and using those skills. And I guess that's what I've done repeatedly.
Yeah, and I'm reminded, I think it's on maybe in Westminster Abbey, there's certainly a tomb somewhere of a bishop. And the engraving around the outside said, when I was a young man, I thought I could change the world. And as I got older, I realized that was quite a tall order. So I thought perhaps if I could just change my country. And then as I got older still, I thought, well, perhaps I'll just change the county I'm in. And then again, a little later, I thought perhaps I'll just change the town. Mm. And then as I come towards the end of my life, I realized that perhaps if I'd begun by changing myself, I might have changed my friends around me, my town, my county, my country, and who knows, the world. So yes, I think you've really nailed it. And it's something that I encourage others that I coach to think about, this lifelong learning. And if you think you know it all, that's a problem in itself. If you think you've never made a mistake, that's a problem in itself. But if you're prepared to constantly learn and not stop learning, people doing PhDs in their 90s, I love it. And this thing about everybody has something to teach you if only you'd listen. Great wisdom there.
I think that's so true. And as you get older, you realize you know less and less. That's the problem. It's slightly scary, actually, because you just realize how little you actually know. Whereas when you're young, I think you know quite a lot. So it's weird. It's like a kind of reverse clock.
Correct.
You realize how little you actually do know about life. And coming back to knowing yourself, if you don't know yourself, then you can't really be a leader.
Yes.
And and the other thing is, you can only really change yourself. You can't change other people. It's for them to change themselves. Yes. And they can do that by being inspired by watching you, but you can't change other people. So there's I love your description there of getting to know yourself. But if we all started out that, when we were tiny with that philosophy, then that would be great.
I think so. And it was Socrates who'd go around and he'd say to everybody, know thyself. And eventually one of his students who was following around, he said, Socrates, you keep saying to everybody, know thyself. Do you know yourself? He said, no, not yet, but I'm getting to know a little bit about this not knowing.
That's wonderful.
I think it is so very true. Okay, health quotient. Obviously, you've been in the whole business all your life, really, after the corner shop in the world of health. What would be your top tips about mental health and physical health, if you were to give a tip on each that you've applied to yourself and has helped you? Because you've been in a very stressful series of jobs, whether it be Thailand or going around those wards in that that time with that infection and all that was going on and the death that was going on, and now with COVID and the sequencing of 1 million different genomes. What's your top tips on those two?
For mental health, I think it's inevitable that during the stresses and strains of life that we'll all be challenged by feeling, by mental illness or people around us with mental illness. I think it's inevitable, and we have to become really aware of that. So for me, speaking about how you feel is really important. Telling people if you're feeling down, you're feeling depressed, just tell somebody. Tell somebody that you're not okay, and it's okay to tell someone that you're not okay. So I think taking that first step, and it can take quite a lot of courage, actually, for people to do that, but to say, I'm not okay. Me personally, I use music and nature a lot, and I lean on my family a lot. I walk outside and look at the changing of the seasons. And family are really important to my own mental health. But I think if we can only move towards an environment where we can speak openly about feeling mentally ill, then we are getting there, but I think there's more to do.
I just want to really support what you've just said, and I think there's been two particular times in my life where my mental health has been very badly affected, and I was, on one occasion, quite suicidal and even contemplated it, but I got through it through talking and through getting some CBT-based therapy, but also some what I call the habit stacking of daily stoic, mindfulness, fitness, yoga, walking the dog, support of my wife, that kind of stuff. But I have the greatest respect for others because you can't see it. It's not like a broken leg where they've got a pot on it. People can't see it. Have you ever had a challenge to your mental health, and how have you coped with it?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, during the early part of COVID-19, that was really very stressful. And I definitely had to go and talk to somebody about that and speak about how I was feeling. And so, so that step of saying to somebody, I'm not all right, can I talk with you, is so incredibly important.
Yeah.
And we hear all the time about people that unfortunately do end their life, and people around them don't know about it. And so it's an area that I'm very passionate about, prevention of suicide and reducing people dying unnecessarily because they haven't felt able to reach out to people and say, this is a really desperate moment for me. And as I said, I've certainly experienced that myself, and I think that gives you great understanding of at least your own, you can't tell what other people are feeling, but your own sense of what that might feel like.
Yeah, and I don't think people should underestimate the positive impact they can have by, as you say, listening well, understanding, supporting someone. Indeed, I have been quite moved by 3 of my clients, not that I'm a psychotherapist, but just they said that if they'd not had the chance to talk it through, they wouldn't be here now. And I've recommended in all cases that they get therapy as well as the leadership coaching, but just, I don't think people should underestimate that you probably don't know the number of people you're helping by just being really there. When someone says, and you say, how are you? And they go, I'm fine. And you go, I'm not picking up that you are fine. I'm somatically, I'm getting that you're not okay. How are you really? And they go, well, really, I'm not okay, actually. Well, okay, let's have a talk about it. No, and
that's right. Listening is so important. Listen and watch, because as you say, Jonathan, you ask again, are you really okay? And something else might come out. And I think we often live in our own heads. We're thinking about, what we're going to have for breakfast, or what we're going to make somebody for tea or whatever, or what we want to say next, or what point we want to prove. Actually, just being quiet and learning to listen is so important.
And you and I have both talked about the book by Nancy Klein, which is on my website on the book reviews that people can look at and download it as an audio or on Amazon, called The Promise That Changed Everything. I Won't Interrupt You. And I think if we were to really, really listen to people, we make a profound difference. People think, oh, I'm just listening. But if you are really, really listening, it is profound. The other aspect of Health Quotient, Sharon, is physical health. You're so busy. What's your top tip for a busy woman like yourself, and how do you look after your physical health? Is it the walking and being in nature? Is that your...
Well, before the pandemic, I have to say that I was exercising every day. I had a trainer. I was going to fitness classes. I was competitively running, doing kettlebell workouts, and now I'm in a phase of my life where that slipped a bit because of pressure of work. I'm not going to beat myself up about that, actually, but I am going to get back to regular exercise, and a lot of that is now walking. I join a fantastic trainer 4 times a week on Zoom, 7:30 in the morning, and go and do those workouts. Physicality is really important, and so I've gone up and down over my life on that. As I said, I try not to beat myself up, but I do think physical exercise is important, but I do need the motivation. So knowing that I've got to join a Zoom call at 7:30 in the morning is the only way that I get myself out to do that. So getting it in the diary is useful.
Yeah, no, it's a very good bit of advice. And once I'm taking your advice after having been ill for the last month, and I'm just slowly getting better. And I'm not doing the HIIT training and all that kind of stuff, because that will put me backwards if I just go too quickly. But I know, give it a few weeks, I'll be back training again. But you just have to, at the right time, do the right thing. EQ is the next component of what makes inspiring leaders in the research that we've done, and high performing people as well. What's your top tip on using your emotions intelligently, emotional and social intelligence? What's a tip you'd share?
I think I'd come back to listening, actually, repeating myself a little bit, but the way to support your colleagues and build skills in rapport is actually to listen what they're saying and be interested actually in what they are saying, and understand their context a bit about their lives and so on. And people come to work and you don't know people's context really, but again, being driven by conversations that are kind of two-way and meaningful rather than always transactional. Sometimes things have to be transactional. You've got to get something done. You've got to achieve something. You've got to reach a milestone or whatever. But there are moments in the day where it's not always like that. And so listening to people, in the coffee room, or it's a bit more difficult on Zoom now, but that listening can be very powerful in creating a strong team.
And in fact, you've just touched on something which is a great technique, if people listening have not used it, I recommend it, which is dialogue, where you agree that the person who's come to see you goes, Sharon, I've got a problem, what should we do about this? And you go, so, okay, let me ask you your own question. And you go for 2 minutes and then stop yourself and ask me the same question again for my freshest thinking. And then I'll ask you for 2 minutes and back and forth until you've got the answer that you want for you to solve it. In other words, that you keep ownership. And that's very powerful to know you're going to have 2 minutes where you won't be interrupted. You're being asked out loud your own question. The brain thinks best in the presence of a question. The synaptic connections crackle away and off things go. If you say it to yourself out loud, it's not the same as you asking me a question I've just asked you. And I found that very, very profound. On to CQ, which is cultural intelligence quotient, diversity, equality, inclusion. You've worked in Thailand, you've been with people of completely different backgrounds, nationalities, in all sorts of ways. What's your top tip about diversity, equality, and being really inclusive?
Actually, the way that I've developed my own sense of cultural intelligence really was by living in Thailand for 7 years, where you're the visitor. People around you have different cultural and social beliefs. They have different food preferences, religious beliefs, etc., cultural boundaries. And when I first got to my job, I was given a crib sheet setting out key expectations about how I would and wouldn't behave, because some behaviours are very offensive. And it was a bit of a surprise to me, I think, to be honest, to start with. And in the first week, I was taken shopping, to clothes shopping by a colleague to say, this is what you might look like would be appropriate for your level of seniority. And I think that being completely, and that was something of a surprise to me, but I realized it was really important to think about how other people feel, what their culture is, what their expectations are. So a single top tip almost feels too superficial to somebody to around equality, diversity, inclusion. But I guess always thinking about what the other person needs and where they're coming from. It's something that has to be in your mind every day. So it's not something that a top tip really does it for me, really. I think it starts with a fundamental sense of fairness and awareness of other people and their cultural context as well. And each taking responsibility. Actually, I think if I had one top tip, perhaps it would be that we each have to take responsibility for making the world a more equitable place. It's not going to happen without each of us doing that and speaking up.
No, you've also triggered in me a particular technique, first person, second person, third person. You can almost enact it in chairs. There's two chairs, you and another person. And it might be that you have a problem with another person, let's call him Michael. I play the part of Michael. You sit in your chair and you describe the issue. Then we swap over and you occupy the second person's chair. You become Michael and you occupy his physiology and you tell me about Michael and Michael's perspective on life and his family and his upbringing and why he might have certain perspectives. And then you come out of that chair and you stand over in the corner and you look at the empty chair where Michael would be and where Sharon is, and you look at the dynamic between the two of them. You go, what's going on between them? What do each of them have as perspective? And it's the third person where you're able to see, that's what's going on between them. And each of them understanding your own first person, but his second person, but now the third person perspective. It's a very powerful technique when used well. Resilience is the next one. You've been knocked back. You've been told twice that you couldn't go to medical school and you still didn't give up. I seem to remember in the psychometrics, endurance is one of your great strengths. You don't take no for an answer, do you? And you did say that endurance was one of your things. What would be a tip that you'd share to have the resilience to get through times of adversity?
I think you're right. I have got great endurance, but endurance on its own doesn't get you anywhere. If you just, in your silo, you can be as enduring as you like, but you have to actually speak with others to actually enact something and make a difference. So my top tip really would be to go and speak to other people. If you want to achieve something, then go and ask people. That you might be pleasantly surprised by the response. If you're having a tough time, go and speak to people. So I think it's all about communication, because resilience and endurance alone doesn't really get you very far until you start to connect with other people. And I think time is a great healer too. I think putting time between yourself and something difficult certainly helps me kind of let go. But I think communicating with others is so vital in your own resilience. Yeah,
no, time definitely heals. And I remember getting my daughters a book called Just Ask by a Yorkshireman. And it was this having the neck just to ask. And they at a very early age, probably they might have been 10 or 12, they learned just to start asking for things. And it was amazing what came their way. What's the worst? They can say no. But if you never ask, you'll never know. The last two around the compass before we go into teams and then books and then top tip would be brand and then legacy. What have you learned from 360 feedback on your own brand and how others perceive you? What would you say on that?
I've thought about this, and I don't think I really have a brand as such. I don't think. I've never really thought of myself as a brand, or I do have an internal brand, and we've talked about that. Your values. If I reflect on 360 feedback, I think when you are really focused and you have a great deal of resilience and endurance, you can sometimes miss the fact that you're trying to get something achieved where other people might think you're a bit stubborn. So with endurance comes a sense of stubbornness, and certainly I can I'm sure that I can be seen as somebody who's actually quite stubborn, but do you know what? It sometimes gets the job done.
Yeah.
But when you have to do something that's really quite different, like setting up the consortium that we set up, that was completely unique. Nobody had ever done that before. And so perhaps I won't apologize for being stubborn about that, because it did need the stubbornness to get the job done. But I think being stubborn might be something that people would say I am.
Yeah, and it reminds me of the old saying that sometimes people say that, this person is an unreasonable man or an unreasonable woman. And often most of the amazing achievements are done by unreasonable men or unreasonable women up to a point. And everything in moderation. But as they say, a weakness is nothing more than an overdone strength. So being strong on endurance is good, but to get to the point of absolute pig-headed when King Canute's sitting there with the waves lapping around his knees and he's saying, I'm ordering the waves to go back, but sire, they're not going to go back. I think that's a really good one. But I must clarify that you do have a brand, by the way. We all have a brand. And our external brand is what people say about us when we're not in the room. And of course, you won't know that until someone like a coach or whoever it is gathers it. And I find it one of the most interesting roles and a privilege. I'm just doing one for a very successful entrepreneur who has a number of CEOs who he has supported, and they've done very well. And he wants 360 feedback on himself, on his strengths, his development areas, and how he should focus his attention in the next 5 years of his life. And so, yeah, I'd always encourage people to get 360 by an independent source, because you'll just get told what people think they want you to say, or you want them to say. So that's always a good one. Legacy. When sadly Sharon Peacock eventually dies, and I hope it's in many, many, many years' time, what would you like your legacy to have been?
The legacy that I work really hard to build up, I think there are two things. One is that by using sequencing in the way we've broken a glass ceiling so that sequencing of pathogens are always going to be with us. So before that, it was really very research focused. Now it's going to be very public health focused. And so I think one of my legacies will be to show that you can use sequencing for actual actionable public health actions. And that's a really good thing. The other thing that I think if you were to ask my colleagues about is mentoring. So I'm really, I do a lot of mentoring. I find it very rewarding, actually. And there are a string of people that I've mentored over my life who I would hope I've helped. And so helping other people to reach their best selves is, I think, a way of leaving a legacy. Training. So I've trained 21 PhD students, and I'm still training PhD students. And education, coming back to mobility, education is so important. So mentoring and education are the two really key things that can help other people. And I would hope that, perhaps quite modest or small, but what I try and do is think about my legacy through those terms.
Yeah, and beautiful. And I'm sure you've made a massive difference. I've even found in our interactions, I learned so much from you, and I'm grateful for that. And Martin Doherty, who I think very highly of, speaks of the difference you've made to people's lives in the way you mentioned about the 21 PhD students. Let's go on to the final couple of questions and then the top tip. Executive teams, whether it's 600 in the consortium, all volunteers, trying to get a herd of cats all sort of in the right direction and heading this way when they're all volunteers, all with strong opinions. And in the world of health and science, there's a lot of very strong opinions, strongly held and strongly put across. What have you done at any stage in your career to turn around a toxic team to make it more high performing? What's a tip you'd give to people listening?
Well, I think that just going back to COG-UK, perhaps, because that's an unusual team. It's a very scattered team of 600 people. One of the key things that I did from a very early point is to say, actually, as a consortium, we are going to give everything away. We're going to give our methods away. We're going to give our genomes away. Everyone's going to have access to this. And you don't have to put me on any scientific publications. There's a joint publication which then accredits everybody in the consortium. And so if you're going to write a scientific paper, you put on a kind of joint authorship so that people can get the credit. But I don't want anything in particular. And when people see that you have very little, you're not asking for very much, you're actually giving more than you get, then actually it can take the sting out of a difficult situation. And, there have been times when people have spoken out in the consortium, and they have their own pressures too. People cancelled their own Christmas last Christmas when alpha variant arose. We call it the variant that stole Christmas, the Grinch variant. People get very stressed and they have to work really hard. So sometimes when they are stressed, they can actually speak out in quite difficult ways. So this won't necessarily translate to many circumstances, I have to say, but in the consortium which I led, I led by a sense of, not trying to control anything or have a sense of ownership over everything, just giving everything away. And that was how we, I think, came together and worked together effectively, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And as I say, Jonathan, it doesn't necessarily translate to other situations, but that's how we really diffuse difficult situations.
Yeah,
and the greater good, of course, as well.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think it was one of maybe Truman or one of the US presidents. He said that when you don't care who gets the credit and you don't try and grab it for yourself, then amazing things can be achieved. And COG-UK has done some amazing things with those 600 volunteers. And I think it's a brilliant approach to say that we'll give it all away. It's just for the benefit of mankind and society. That is a far greater good, which inspires people who want to come to work to make a difference when they're not selfish little clods of ailments and grievances, complaining, why is it not being done for me? I've forgotten who it was. I think I was going to say Oscar Wilde or someone like that. I'll think of who said it. Talking of which, let's go on to books. And I know you have a love of poetry. Tell us about what you tend to read and how it helps you.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have a book of poetry on my bedside, actually. It's a book of war poems. And actually, when I'm feeling that I need to ground myself, perhaps I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself or I want to read something that moves me, I will open that. And Wilfred Owen is one of my favorite poets. And when you read some of the work that he has written, it's a real, in some ways, it's a pickup, because you say, look, your life isn't that bad. And, you can afford to put food on your plate, and you live in a warm home, etc. You have a family around you. So poetry is a touchstone for me. There's so much depth in poetry in just a small amount of words. So even if you have 5 minutes, it can be, a profound moment that you can use. I often find I pick up very long books and I don't get to the end, but perhaps that's why poetry does it for me, because I can pick it up and read something.
So which is the one I would like to get, the book you're reading? Which is the one I should get?
Well, the poem that I'd recommend by Wilfred Owen, and this is in various volumes, is Dulce et decorum est.
Yes.
Which is it's sweet and right to die for your. Well, the whole thing is Dulce et decorum est, and then the last sentence is it's right and proper to die for your country, effectively, and he puts across that actually it's an old lie, that it's not right and proper or sweet to die for your country. And so if you're going to read one poem, and that is in various different volumes, Dulce et decorum est is the book, the poem that I'd recommend.
Yeah, thank you. Wow. Well, I definitely will. And I do remember reading it and that it was profound and really made me think, particularly as a serving army officer who had a father who gave his life for his country, an uncle and a grandfather. And there were moments when it was pretty hairy for me, but I never had to give my life for my country. So I do have respect for those who do, but I remember thinking about the Falklands War, and I was so sad I missed it. But then my friends who were there, seeing how damaged they were by it, or seeing people die, it really has messed with their heads ever since. So people like to think it's glamorous and exciting, but there is a horrible price to pay.
Absolutely. And this is particularly about World War I, of course, in the trenches where Wilfred Owen was. And so it's particularly about that period in history. And I wouldn't be able to confer it to kind of other times in our history, but certainly World War I in the trenches was clearly a very tough time. My grandfather was fought in the trenches, and very difficult place to be.
Yeah, and my other grandfather was there in the Honourable Artillery Company and got knocked over the head with a German marlin spike and left for dead for 2 days and crawled back. And he was never the same again after that time. So on a more cheerful note, let's end with your introduction to yourself again, if you would, Sharon, please, for a 2-minute top tip on leadership.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, hello and welcome to this podcast. My name is Sharon Peacock. I'm Professor of Public Health and Microbiology at the University of Cambridge and the Executive Director of the COVID-19 Genomics UK Consortium, which was developed apace to generate SARS-CoV-2 genomes for the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm also a non-executive director on the board of the Cambridge University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. So welcome to the Inspiring Leadership series. I'm going to hand you over to Jonathan Bowman-Perks.
And thank you. And would you just give us your 2-minute top tip, if you would, Sharon?
Yes. My 2-minute top tip is to use 2 skills that perhaps are used less than others. The first is listening. So listening is an incredible skill that can be very effective in understanding the people that you interact with, giving them time to speak and really trying to understand what they're saying, rather than you existing in your head and thinking about what you need to say, what point you need to say, what you're going to make for breakfast, etc. Listening carefully to people can be really, really powerful. Together with silence, actually, silence is very powerful. But the other skill really is to use different lenses to look at situations. And so you look at life through your own lens, but actually, if you look at the lens through other people's eyes, the person that you're speaking to, or a stranger, or your leadership icon, if you do that, you come at the situation with a very different perspective. So I think bringing those together can make a real difference to how you behave as a leader and how you work.
The 2 L's, the listening
2 L's.
And the lens. Well, Sharon Peacock CBE, thank you very much indeed. It's been a real honor having you on the series. And please continue to work with those amazing volunteers, those 600 people who are making such a difference. And thank you for sharing your wisdom today.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's been an absolute pleasure.